Hi everyone, this is Naman. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there. I tried, but I was denied entry. But that's past me. I'll do my presentation online. I'll be also available for any questions after that, and I'll send you guys my contacts if you have questions later as well. I was also planning to do a workshop yesterday, which couldn't happen. But I have all the content with me right now. When you have questions, I'll go through that content as well. So let me introduce myself. I'm Naman. I'm a researcher with Uber. I work on international growth research for Uber, and today I'll be presenting to you about how we design for everyone everywhere. Let me share my screen. Once you see it, just give me a big hi. Can you see my screen now? Perfect. Yeah, so I'll be talking about a topic which is really close to my heart, which is designing for everyone and everywhere. And this is one of the mantras which I've been working on in my previous experiences. I worked with Microsoft. I worked with Target before this, and all my life I've worked on designing products which are more inclusive, which are available for everyone and everywhere. A lot of companies have started doing projects which help uh, help design products which are more inclusive, which are more available for everyone. And today I'll be talking about one of those products, but also I'll talk about what's a good framework for you to research, for you to find out what these opportunity areas are. Today we'll be taking a case study with Uber, and this is one project which I completed 6 months back, and I'll take this as case study to show you what a framework for a good inclusive design is. This is the agenda which I've set up. I'll talk about what's the business and consumer context behind it. What is the mission which we came up with, and then I'll talk about the process on how we build this product. So I'll go through the whole process, and then I'll talk about one specific product which is called Uber Lite, which was developed for emerging markets for Uber. Emerging markets for Uber means Latin America, uh, Middle East and North Africa, and Indian subcontinent. All of these places are really, really important for our business, and I'll talk about why we developed Uber Lite, and then I'll open up for question and answer towards the end. So let's talk about what is the context of our markets where Uber operates, and how why is this so important for even our business and our consumers. So Uber Uber has grown tremendously in the last 10 years of our existence. We recently completed a big milestone. We did 10 billion trips across the world. And these 10 billion trips were done not in one city, they were done in 60 countries across multiple cities. It's such a global operation. Uh, but a number which keeps us really, really humbled is that we are just less than a percent of overall $5.5 trillion transportation market. So when we see this number, it just shows us that there is so much opportunity left outside which we haven't touched yet. And that's where we start sort of developing new business models to see what are new consumer needs which we haven't fulfilled right now. Uh, what we realized over a period of last 2 years is that next biggest growth lever for us, Uber, will come outside of Uber. 70% of our trips were happening outside of the US. And it was really important for us to understand who this user is. Who is the user who lives outside San Francisco, this tech bubble? Our company was developed inside San Francisco, and a lot of people did not realize who the user outside of the US was. And that was one of the biggest job which we took as an international growth team in India. So our team was based out of India, and we were given the charter to develop for the users who live outside of the US. And there were, so what we realized over a period of time, that there were several problems to be solved. We were this company which was only solving for a very small set of audience. We were solving for people with smartphones who were technology savvy. We were developing for people who had iPhones, great phones, and great data connections and internet connection. But there were several problems which we had not considered. And this is just a visual representation. This doesn't mean any data, but it just gives you a sense of so many different problems which exist outside what we were solving. So I'll talk about the process next on how we dug deeper into this product life cycle and developed this product. So this is the process. The first thing we did was we started doing some understanding of our existing data. We did data analysis and did a desk research to understand the three big markets for our emerging markets. So we started understanding what the audience for Brazil looks like, for what the audience for India looks like, and what the audience for Mexico, for example, looked like. Started understanding how different light apps and progressive web app ecosystems were developing in these countries. And when we started digging deeper into our data, we realized that there are several important problems. For example, one being data, and a lot of people not being able to use our apps because they are super heavy. They consume a lot of data. And we also started realizing that a lot of users outside of our US market had very different kinds of phones and devices which they were using. But it was not the only few things we realized. As a researcher, I one of the biggest job for me was to make sure that my team, which was sitting in India, which understood the India market really well, also understood other markets, for example, Brazil and Mexico. The only thing they really knew about Brazil was actually this. So the India team only knew that there was this football team in Brazil, and there was nothing else beyond that. And it was one of my jobs as a user researcher to take them and to Brazil to actually experience this. So what we did was, the first thing we did was to take this team in US, from US and India to Latin America, to actually experience what our consumers experience every day, right? And that was sort of, that triggered a lot of thoughts for us to really understand who these users were. These are few pictures from our Latin America trip. We went to Brazil, multiple cities, and Mexico, multiple cities, to really understand who our users were. What are their daily problems which they face with technology? How do they use technology? Which devices do they use? How do they sort of travel every day? What are their needs which we haven't solved, for example? So we did multiple methods to really understand who these users were. So we did home visits. Here you can see me interviewing one of the participant in Sao Paulo, where we were really trying to understand how their technology use on an everyday basis was. We did street intercepts and observations. So when you are on streets and when you are realizing how people really move in these places, is only when you get a real picture of how transportation works. So this is us talking to a taxi driver in Recife in Brazil, where we were trying to understand what his problems were, what information does he miss, and what are some of the things we can do to improve his experience. We also did a lot of concept testing. So there are a few ideas which we had around, let's say, devices and network, which our data had shown us, which we tested with our consumers when we were in Mexico, for example. This is us conducting like a roundtable session with users in Mexico. Uh, so with this trip, we realized that there are multiple reasons why people love to ride with Uber, and there are reasons, for example, to visit church, when they have luggage, when punctuality matters, when I have an interview to appear at, when I am going to an unknown destination, when I'm traveling with kids, when I'm traveling at night. There are so many reasons why people were using Uber, but we also realized that why they were not riding with us. There were several reasons why people were not able to ride with us. And for example, a lot of people who were not technology savvy, they said that I don't want to learn something new. So I take Uber only when my daughter is along with me. I ask my daughter to book for me. I don't understand this app. Some people had familiarity issues. They said, I will just call a taxi. Why do I need to download an app on my phone? Some people had devices on which they couldn't download our app. For example, I tried, but I couldn't download the app on my phone. I can only use your app when I'm on my home with a great internet connection. When I'm on the field, I don't get good internet connection. So there were many things which came up. A lot of people were scared to send their kids alone. They couldn't understand. They couldn't trust Uber drivers. Who is the strange person coming to my place? I know my taxi driver who lives nearby. I would rather trust him. So there were many issues, right from safety to data and devices, and really tech savviness, right, which came up because of this research. So based on this, we did like a product synthesis to understand what are the key themes, and sort of came back with four key themes for our riders. The first one was really about access, which goes back to two things, which is my phone is often full, and I need to start deleting apps to make room for my photos. Photos are really important. Other things which are really important to their lives take more importance over, let's say, an app like Uber. So they start deleting the app. We started understanding this a little further. The second was reliability. Reliability of our app on these low-end devices was not super solid. It used to crash when I was booking. People used to become angry, and then we started understanding how this app was not built really for these kind of devices and network conditions. But not only data and devices was something which we found out. The third thing which we thought was really, really important was this really big segment of users who really did not understand how this technology or new thing like Uber works. So I don't know how to use this. My daughter requests for me, and that was sort of the answer we got from an audience which was not super tech savvy. The fourth thing, which was super interesting, which we had not anticipated, was something which came up really big in Latin America. Was this need of safety? I always let my husband know where I am as soon as I book. A lot of people are very family centric and want to make sure that every information is shared, and they want to make sure that the safety is not compromised when you go into an Uber. So, taking into account these and other needs, we started developing like a framework for us to solve key problems. The first one was my basic Android device is incapable of running effectively an Uber app. The second was for my Uber experience is challenging because of poor bandwidth, connectivity, and GPS in my area. And the third one was I really find this application to be really complex. I don't know really how to use this application. And based on these three key needs, we started developing like a mantra for us. And for this team, the mantra became that we want to make sure that anyone can Uber, and we will solve problems around data, devices, and simplicity to make sure that these people can use our application. And this is a picture, really amazing picture from one of our designers who I used to work with. This is a picture from India in a market of flowers, as you can see. So this became sort of our mantra to go behind this consumer base, which couldn't use Uber because of several reasons which I mentioned before. Uh, so today I'll talk about one of the products which came out of this research. It's called Uber Lite. Uber Lite is an Android application which was developed for emerging markets, and this was an application which tried to solve all those three needs, which is around data and devices and simplicity. So these were sort of three principles which we started designing this app with. We wanted to make sure that this app was extremely light. When we say light, it means a lot of things, and I'll walk through that. It should be instant. It should feel instant to a lot of users because it's really important for these data and device conditions. And the third and most important was to make sure that this application was really simple for people who are using technology for the very first time, right? So these were three principles which we started going behind. Uh, so when you talk about these three principles, what does these words translate into is really important to understand. For example, light. We wanted light to not be just the lightness or the weight of the app. So the app was less than 5 MB, which is 1/8 of our current app. But its lightness didn't only mean that it was 5 MB. It also meant how it looks. It should feel light in terms of understanding. At every moment, the app should feel light. It should allow you guidance across the way. The second is instant. Even in adverse network and device condition, the app should feel instant. And we did a lot of things which I'll talk about later to make sure that this app felt instant. Even when you were off network, when you went offline, what information can we give to make sure that it should feel instant. You always have control over your journey. And the third is make it simple to use. A user should feel in control. A lot of these new users who we were targeting with Uber Lite did not were not super tech savvy. They were not people like us who knew maps and how maps work and where am I. Their orientation and all of those things were not super easy. So we made this a principle. Only the most essential tasks which are exposed to you, these are easily accomplished with minimal cognitive load. So I'll talk about light. So let's go a little deeper on that. There is, of course, a lot of engineering excellence behind making this app less than 5 MB. So we are a really big organization, and the engineering team started optimizing our libraries and started to cut them short. And we created a framework which was called a light backend framework, which started doing a lot of sort of things to reduce the size of the app. But but the biggest challenge in front of us was we already had an app in the market, and we were sort of it was really important for us to understand which core features to keep and which core features to, for example, reduce, because now we were creating this app which is supposed to be 1/8 of the size of the current app, but we cannot do it with all the features existing. So we started understanding which features are important for our consumer base. So advanced features like business and family profiles or scheduled rides, all pervasive maps. So our app, as you can see, is completely map dependent. Things like these were not super important to our consumers. So we started cutting these down and making sure that these things, for example, secondary flows were taken into web views, and then all of these things sort of led to a core feature set, which allowed us to reduce the size of the app. Instant. Instant was an equally important challenge to make sure that the app worked in adverse network and device conditions. So maps were really heavy on network consumption, and we were a really map dependent app before we started building this product, right? So we deeply understood the utility of the map. So I did a research to understand what does map mean to people today, and what information gaps it really fills, right? And that was super important for us to define this framework for of maps on demand. So we made sure that at important junctures of your booking flow, you still have the map available, but it was on demand. It was not only it was not the centerpiece of our app. Only the pieces of critical information, for example, when you're on trip, when your driver is coming to pick you up, were made available on map. The second thing which we developed, and this is something which engineering and research did together, was this network guidance framework. So when you talk about network, there are so many things which can change, and the app should adapt to those network conditions. So I'll talk about what framework we developed to make sure that we sort of take care of all these conditions. Uh, the third one is also super important. When you develop an app for a market which has really good internet, you develop everything keeping in mind that you will always be online. You create products which are always online. For us, it was important to understand the value of offline as a state, right? And a lot of people are offline most of the times. They use internet only when needed. They keep switching internet off and on because they want to save their data. And hence we created this concept of offline as a state, but offline as a primary state, right? Offline is not a secondary state to us. Most of the apps which you must have used today create offline as a secondary state. When you go offline, what do you do? But we started the concept of offline as a primary state. Offline should be the first thing which you should think about. How do we deliver information even when you are offline, to make sure that you get into that car and reach wherever you want? And the last thing which I'll talk about is this light backend orchestration. So this is something which our engineering team developed. Uh, a lot of times when you create apps, you send all information back and forth. They created a framework. They were only sending delta payloads, which means they were only sending bits of information which has changed. So for example, if you are on trip, or your driver is coming to pick you up, the only information which changes is his ETA. It's never driver name or driver information. All of those information remains the same. So they started sending information which was changing instead of sending everything back again. And I'll talk about this simple as one of the core fundamentals of this app now. So there were 6 frameworks which we developed to make this app really simple. I'll talk about uh, a few of them, if not all. The first one is guided pickups. So when you our app was extremely dependent on an actual address, but in India, a lot of people do not communicate addresses by street names or by addresses. A lot of people talk about landmarks. Hey, I'm near the shop. Can you pick me up near the statue? And it was really important for us to build that cultural element into the app. So we created a framework where we will show you all the landmarks which are nearby you. So as you can see in the GIF which is loading, you can see, let's say, a Starbucks near you, a shop near you which you can pick up from, instead of actually typing addresses. So a lot of people do not talk about addresses as in the for example, in US or in Europe, a lot of people actually talk about addresses. In emerging markets, a lot of people talk about landmarks, and landmarks become really important as pickup points. So we created this framework to make sure people can select nearby landmarks, and these landmarks were 100-meter away from you. So you can pick a variety of landmarks, walk to that landmark, and get picked up without creating any problems. So I talked about how this pickups framework also should work uh, with network. With very high accuracy, we can tell you where you exactly are. But we also know that there are situations where GPS doesn't really work. So what can we do in a low accuracy GPS situation? We provide you with nearby landmarks with best of our knowledge, instead of providing you with information which is not correct. The second thing we realized from our data was that a lot of people, uh, 80% of people go to only 20% of landmarks, or 20% destinations. You repeat destinations. You go to your office regularly, you go to your schools regularly. So there are so many destinations which repeat. 80% of the times you are choosing from 20% of the destinations, right? And what we realized was a lot of people on these smaller phones would not like to type, and hence we created like a in like all the we started saving all the places which you were going, and made sure that it was really easily available. And as you can see here, you can see all the places which you have been to, but you also see the most visited destinations up front. So a lot of people on these small screens do not have to type. When you type, half of your screen gets covered. So all of those things were sort of getting solved by this. I talked about how maps on tap was one of the features we launched. We understood that the importance of map as an information framework was important at certain points of time. So we made map available on tap instead of using your data all the time, right? So we made it available if you need it, but it was a level below. It was not never like the first thing which you were doing. So, for example, here you can see on the right, you can see the most important information, which is a car will arrive in 4 minutes. But only if you want to see the map, you can go and look at the map. So we abstracted all the information which users needed across the journey with maps, but we also made sure that for users who would like to see them, it's available on request. This was like I talked about how LATAM had such an important need for safety. So we made sure that you can always share your ride very easily with someone from your friends and family. So here you can see, you can choose from a list of people who you can share your status with, and this made sure that you are always in sync, and your friends or family knows where you are. This was for India in particular, and for non-English speaking countries. It's really important to make sure that your app is localized. And a lot of people do not, a lot of companies localize, let's say, based on your device language, and we wanted to be more explicit about it. So uh, we made sure that the first thing you do when you download this app is to select the language of your preference. And in India, I don't know if you guys know, there are 27 plus languages which are spoken across the country. So we made sure that this app was available in all of these languages. And the first thing we ask you is to choose your language instead of us being smart and picking it up from your device, right? Because a lot of people in India still use their apps in English, even though their main language would be something else, for example, here in Hindi. So we made sure that you can confidently choose your app, because that's the first thing which we are asking. Uh, so all of these things then sort of led to a beta version of this app, and it was really important for us to now take this app into the product. Sort of across this journey, we also tested this app with our users. So as you can imagine, we were testing this app with with our users across the market. These are some of the pictures of our research which we were doing. And sorry. And one of the things we mastered here was to do a very contextual research. So the picture on the right top is actually a person using this app in a car. So we used to take them actually on trips to make sure that they can really understand how this app works. And as you can see, these are some of the devices which these people were using. So after almost 9 months of work, as you can see, this is Maria, who was from Brazil, who we met an year back, and who was completely dependent on her daughter to book a ride. And this is Kaushalya on the right, who was able to book a ride because it was really simple for her to understand it. It worked on her devices. All the network conditions were met, and in a year we could develop a product which was usable for our consumers, and we could now tap into hundreds of millions of users who earlier couldn't use Uber because of it. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. If you have any questions, super happy to take them up now. Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, is this application already released?
Sorry?
Uber Lite, is this already released?
Yeah, this application we launched 6 months back in all of our emerging markets. So we started with India, then launched this in Latin America, and then now this app is also getting launched in Middle East and North Africa.
Namant, first of all, thank you so much for such a grateful presentation. It's really very informative and really
Thank you.
It's really pity that we don't have you with us today physically, but it's good to put the face on the name as always. So it's great. I hope.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
I hope you
I'm
will get
really
a chance
bummed
to
I
get
couldn't
to
be
our
there,
beautiful
sir.
place again and to see Belarus and Minsk, and it would be nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
So I wanted to ask you, there is a concern I faced with Uber a few times. Once it was in London, another one in Berlin. And the concern is that when I want to get in touch with the customer service and I want to get the answer to my question, like for example, why this doesn't work, there is no way to do that. And I can't really get in touch with someone instantly, and it's always like I have to go through the hustle, and I end up just giving up and just using something else, like a regular taxi. So do you have any comments on that? Is like, as a growth engineer, like are you working on any aspects of customer service or any sort of this?
Actually, that's a brilliant question. That's something which we've heard again and again, both from our driver partners and our riders and eaters. And this is something which we started working on. There's a team which is specifically targeted at improving our consumer service, and it's not only, for example, you mentioned phone call is something which makes a relevance for you, but we are also trying to build this omni-channel customer support experience, so that whenever a person calls or reaches out to us, we can give them a resolution in no time possible. So yeah, to answer your question, in short, yes, we are working on this, and I, as a researcher, I've done research to understand what are different needs our consumers have across the board, and there is a team which is improving this experience. They're working on it right now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. What are your personal KPIs as a growth researcher?
So the KPIs which researcher typically works with are very closely tied to what product KPIs are. So when for example when you define a product, when you write a product document, the product team defines some of the key success metrics, and as a researcher, I take those metrics and really define them from a user point of view, right? So I think two things which I do to make sure those KPIs are met are to get the answers which the team needs to get there. For example, I'll give you a very concrete example instead of. Uh, so, for example, one of the KPIs for Uber Lite was to make sure that it works in really adverse network conditions, right? So engineering team and product team defined how this would mean, right? So they started creating a framework which was which was to make sure that this app will respond to you in 300 microseconds or less, and that was the KPI engineering and product defined. For me, it was really important to make sure that the user experience for users was equally easy, because you can do a lot of things in the background and users may not understand that. And so what we did was to make sure that there was a communication framework like I showed. Let me share my screen again. Just give me a second. Yeah. So so they knew that GPS, for example, has all these 5 different states, but our users did not know that, right? So making sure that we communicate all of these changes which are happening in the background, and all the frameworks which you're developing in the background to our consumers equally easily was a success metric for me. For example, a success metric over here was how many people, for example, chose nearby landmarks. While we had created this framework and product was talking about microseconds and how GPS works in the background, for me it was how do we communicate this on the user experience with our users so that they don't feel confused, and how many people dropped off, for example, when you're talking about a pickup. Were there big drop offs happening in the pickup framework, right? So making sure all of this is communicated upfront to our consumers was a KPI which I converted into. Another example would be we started removing maps, for example, right, from our app. How many people, for example, used this feature, which is hide maps or make maps available? And it was really different for different markets. So one of the things we did 6 months down the line was in Brazil, we made these maps available on default, right? So these are some of the KPIs which I have from a very consumer centric lens overall.
Thank you very much for your very detailed answer.
Thank you.
Hi. So also thank you from my side for this presentation and great overview of emerging markets. For me, there is one more thing which makes these markets unique or different is the fraud, especially like card fraud or like any other types of fraud. So are you also facing that, and is it somehow handled in the application?
Can you please repeat that for me?
So
What?
fraud, you know, card fraud, fraudulent transactions, people steal money and that kind of things. So do you handle it in applications, because it's also different from regular market?
Yes, exactly. So the payments team. So I've actually now moved to the payments team, which sits in Amsterdam, and I may be able to answer your question partially. A lot of things which are done on localized payments are are done out of Amsterdam. Let me give you a few examples of this. For example, so if your question is specifically on fraud,
Yes.
yeah. So one of the things which we've started doing is I've started working very closely with the risk team. So we have a risk assessment team which understands all of these different kinds of frauds which happen in our global markets. One of the examples is when driver partners uh, are are fished. I'll give you an example of when driver partners are fished, right? So most of our driver partners have, let's say, an account added where they want to send their earnings to. But what we have started doing is realizing that there are many phishing schemes going on. A lot of people want to take money out of driver partners' earnings, right? Because there's so many of them right now. So we have started developing many rules to make sure that their earnings are not fished off. So one of the things we did recently was when there is a change in account, right? Um, let's say when someone adds a new debit card suddenly, we block them for 48 hours to understand all of the implication with our driver partners, uh, and we do not release their earnings for 48 hours. While this may be interesting from a risk point of view, it also creates a lot of friction for drivers, because if someone actually did it, they may feel a lot of pain in that case, right? So what we did was we've started developing a two-factor authentication framework for them. So whenever you change a card, our customer support reaches out to them and asks for certain details to make sure that it's the right person, they are not being phished. Another thing which we started doing was to make sure that they're educated about it, right? What information to share, what information to not share with someone when you call. And these are regular practices which, for example, banks do already, right? These are few things which we've started doing. But we also have like a really detailed risk frameworks based on what kind of behavior a driver partner is showing in the background. So a few things. For example, we only release their earnings when you are beyond 25 trips, so that we understand that they want to be stable on this platform. Things like these are already being implemented, but we also want to make sure that these risk rules are not super difficult in terms of creating friction. So we are equally working with, so I'm the user experience researcher. I want to make sure that their experience is as smooth as possible. The risk team's job is to make sure that there is no fraud. So we are trying to balance this friction with the user experience smoothness. So these are a couple of things which we are right now planning to do, but there are many things which are coming up to make sure that this never happens.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. Thanks for the presentation, first of all. My
Thank
question
you.
is, you talked about localization and how important it is for developing like universal application. My question would be, how are you dealing with competition that emerges in different countries, localized competition? For example, in Russia, obviously, there's Yandex Taxi and Get Taxi in Moscow, which are strong competition, and Moscow is the largest city in Europe. So my question, from the user experience perspective, how are you staying relevant when other competitors can actually localize a bit better than you? Because you need to focus on universality, they don't have such a problem.
Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting question, because as a company, we are really global and our working model is extremely global. And we want to create solutions which can work globally and should work globally. And one thing which we have realized is there are few things which we do which will work globally across the markets, but there are so many things which we also have to now do to make sure that we are locally relevant, right? And so one of the efforts which we have started doing is to create an app framework which allows for all of these localizations to be possible, right? So for example, I'll give you an example of Uber Lite. So I talked about how landmarks are so popular in India, right? And a lot of people communicate addresses through landmarks. But when we launched this app in Brazil, that was not the case. Brazil, for example, Sao Paulo, which is a pretty big city, uh, has very well defined streets and addresses and everything. And a lot of people were not using our landmark feature. But we had created this application to be like really modular. So what we did was we switched off this feature in Sao Paulo and in a lot of other cities in uh, Brazil. So making sure that while you are creating a really global product which should scale across different markets, it is also equally important to create it super modular so that you can either switch off a feature or you can add a feature which is relevant to those local markets. So that's how we've been developing like the core framework of our apps. And so for example, other example would be to the ability to add different payment methods. So the question just before me was around different payment methods which should work locally. So we've launched UPI, which is a unified payment interface in India, but we've also launched uh, credit cards in different markets, right? So making sure that these things which are extremely locally relevant, we create them very modularly. Another example would be vehicle views, right? You must have seen, so when you go to different markets, there are very different vehicle products which we have available. When you go to India, you will find autos. When you go to Sri Lanka, you'll find tuk-tuks. When you go to US, you'll find Uber Black, which is a luxury car. So our framework on the app is super modular to make sure that these things are possible. And now we are launching micro mobility. So when you go to Paris, you will also find bikes on our platform and scooters on our platform. And if you go to US, you will find transit on a platform. So you can book a metro ticket, you can get a metro ticket on our app, right? So making sure that the app is extremely modular in and understanding which places are super localized, right? So the what we have realized is that booking flow overall is something which works globally, but there are so many different elements across the booking flow which are locally relevant. For example, payment methods, vehicle views, and how people use addresses. All of these things are very different in different markets. So we rehauled the app to make sure that these things are modular and we can add those things as per local markets.
Hi, and thanks a lot for your presentation. It was really nice to, not to have you here, but to see you on the screen. And I have two questions for you. First of all, it would be really interesting to understand what are the three main insights you got from all the research. I mean, how people are common, how people are different in the different parts of the world, and how that influenced on your product. And the second question would be, what are the three main challenges that you had in the research, rollout, or in the usage after the rollout? I'm sure that you've got a lot of those and insights and challenges, but maybe you could pick up three.
So
thanks.
Yeah, so I think so. I'll go one by one. Your first question is extremely relevant, and I was planning to do like a workshop yesterday. Let me share my screen and let's talk a little bit about how do you now think of all of these insights and build a framework which helps you sort of scale this, right? And every company is different, problems which you're solving are extremely different. So let's talk about how these different insights fall in under different needs, right? So the biggest sort of research insights are which fall under the first bucket of making your app useful, right? You can create an amazing product which is extremely engaging and extremely usable, but if it's not useful to your audience, it's kind of useless, because then people really don't need it, right? So what makes an app useful? And I look at three things primarily to make sure that that product is useful. The first one is to take into account the cultural context, and these are a few questions I ask, right? Are you aware of how your product intersects with local norms of gender, religion, politics, and society? Does your technology feel safe, secure, and inviting to different demographics which you're solving? The second is commerce, which is, have you understood local economics, currencies, and payments? And have you understood local purchasing power and how people purchase, right? So let me give you a few examples of this. Uh, this is a very specific cultural insight which we got from Latin America, which was around safety. And while safety is important across the world, it was really more important when we were in LATAM, right? And this was something which we started building into a feature. This is a cultural insight which led to making landmarks which we got from India, for example, right? The second most important, once you have made an app which is useful to people of that demographic, how do you make this app usable now? To make it usable, you need to do three things. You have to make sure that it works for all different kinds of connectivity. So does your design work offline or in shaky networks? Does it degrade gracefully in low 2G networks? Does it handle smoothly intermittent connectivity, right? Is it compatible with different kinds of devices with people using? And the third and most important is your design keeping low on data cost, installation, and all of those things. So this is an example from YouTube in India, right? In India, data is really costly, and a lot of people do not want to spend a lot of data. So they started doing allowing them people to download with low quality and standard quality. We started hiding maps to make sure we save their data, right? Things like this. And the third and most sort of, once you've made the app useful and usable, you have to make it really engaging for your users. So when I think of insights, I sort of think of this framework to make sure that insights, the most important ones are which make the app useful for our users. The second ones are which sort of make it usable across the different spectrum. And the third is to make it super engaging for our users. Can you repeat your second question?
The second question was, what were the three challenges that you got in the research, rollout, and the usage after the rollout?
Yes. So let's talk about research. So I think the biggest challenge for me as a researcher was to really make sure that this team, which was sitting in India, so it was a team of 40 people, and we of course cannot take the whole team to Brazil and Mexico, right? How do we still make sure that they know the differences between an Indian consumer and a consumer sitting like 5,000 kilometers away from you? So it was really important for me to make sure that I invite them into live sessions when I was doing it in Brazil, so that they understand who this user is. When you hear, and there is a visceral learning which you get when you are hearing it direct from your user, right? I can create amazing documents and movies, but people will still not get that kind of a learning which they get when they hear it directly from a consumer's point of view, right? So it was really important for me to make sure that they hear live sessions, they can see our consumers' their face and hear it from them. So that was one of the biggest challenges. The second was to do continuous research. I talked about how we did testing for almost 6 months. So we created a program to test all of these different things which you are designing with our users in Brazil, Mexico, and Middle East. So I created a program which was called Testing Thursdays, which was to test this app across these all markets in one day, right? So every Thursday, I used to test this app with our users in all these markets. So uh, it was really difficult to do it in 4 markets at the same time, right? And I cannot humanly do it. So I hired an agency in LATAM, and I was doing it remotely in Middle East. So gaining all these insights, like you said, like your previous question, and then creating a framework for insights to flow in was my second biggest challenge, because they were all these insights were coming from 4 different information sources, and to analyze them and to still make it usable for my team was kind of the biggest second challenge. And on rollout, I think that's an interesting area. When we were rolling it out, like I said, we created a beta program so that we don't roll it out directly to all our consumers. So during that beta program, we selected 20 consumers in each of these markets. And before we rolled it out to everyone in that market, we tested it with these 20 consumers. And we found out a lot of problems beforehand, before launching in the market. So I think creating like a really solid beta program is one of the solutions of rolling it out to many consumers in the market.
Thanks a lot. It sounds like a really interesting and challenging work.
Thank you.
I think I will ask one more question. Is this application, Uber Lite, going to be available in other countries? Because for me, it may be very useful when I'm in roaming. Every megabyte is on count. And for example, Facebook, they have their own Facebook Lite, and it is available all over the world. Are you going to do something like this?
Yes, so I think that's the next phase of this application. We designed this application keeping in mind the consumers of emerging markets, right? So we looked at 4 key markets. One was Latin America, second was Indian subcontinent, and then Middle East and North Africa was the third one. Um, but we are now testing this app in other different regions to make sure that we understand these regions first before we start launching that app, right? So like you said, the need is pretty universal. Facebook Lite took 2.5 years for this journey to make to everyone, right? So example, even people in the US today use Facebook Lite, and I'm doing research to understand what needs do they really have, right? Maybe not data, but for simplicity, a lot of people are keeping that app. So my job now is to really understand what USP uh, resonates with users in different markets, right? So when I did research in US, I'm realizing that a lot of people who use Uber for very simple day-to-day purposes, they are liking the simplicity of this app, right? They may not they may not use it because of data or size of the app, but because of the simplicity of the app. So what we are realizing is uh, that there are different USPs for different markets, and based on that we'll start rolling it out to different regions. And these insights are less for product but more for marketing and rollout, because now they know what USPs people really like in this region, and then they can roll it out or this app to that region. So that's sort of the phase 2 of this app. And We are doing research to understand what USPs work for those markets, and based on that, we'll start rolling it out.
Thank you.
No more questions. That's great. So thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your answers. So this
Thank
applause
you.
for you. Thank you that you've been with us. So see you. Hoping to see you in Minsk next time, yeah?
Yeah, I hope so too. I will leave my contact if I have any questions unanswered, and if you want to apply this framework, I'll be happy to like walk you through this framework and how to do it. Super happy to connect on social media, LinkedIn, and give any answers which I haven't. It was amazing. Although it would have been great if I was physically there, but nevertheless, it was amazing. Questions were amazing. Thanks a lot for your time today. Have a good rest of the conference. Bye bye. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.